Oh, happy day. Welcome into another episode of Six Rotations, brought to you as always by SNA Sports, better equipment for a better game. Daniel Gillman, Mick Haley, smiles all around as the bracket is set. Here we are in the final Monday of November, breaking it down for you. No Tuesday episode. No, we got this done on a Monday morning for you. Beaming with excitement, a brand new format for the NCAA tournament this year, Mick. Top 32 teams seeded to try to separate some of this unfair geography, and we're bracket ready. So we're going to bring you the bracket. We're going to have it for you. We're going to zoom in on each quarter, as they call it, but we'll call them regions sometimes, and we'll break it all down. But first off, Mick, Texas avoids Rice. Miami, Florida State, UCF avoid Florida. There's no Towson, Penn State matchup. Do you think that this seeding situation is a lot better than the past?
I wouldn't use a lot, but I think it's better for sure. But the question I have is how they came up with the 16 hosts, and so it's interesting because if you look at the RPI, and they didn't put out the RPI until after the selections were made. That was another one that we were looking at, but I do think it's better. I do think the balance is better. It's better for the kids. They're going to have more fun in the tournament because they're seeing new opponents. So I think the committee probably hit a home run on that one.
Well, here's the three main headlines for those that just came into this episode kind of blind, excited for Mick and I to break it all down for you. The SEC, semi-expected, was the Big 12 from last year. They brought 7 teams in, 3 bubble squads in Auburn, Tennessee, and LSU, all made the cut for the 32 at-large teams. They were the best team in RPI. Big 12 was also the best team in RPI. They only got 5 teams in. And for the first time in 8 years, the Big 10 only has 6 teams in the NCAA tournament, and none of them are in the Stanford region. So a lot of mixtures. And if you're curious, Wisconsin and Nebraska are on the same side of the bracket. You can see them on the right side. So they would potentially match up in Omaha in the semifinal. Now, another big one, Texas, Wisconsin, Louisville, Stanford get the top 4 seeds, with Minnesota, in fact, getting that 5th spot, and then Pittsburgh 6, Nebraska 7, USD 8. So Pittsburgh avoids Texas, maybe a little bit of a good news, bad news situation for the Panthers. What'd you think about the Stanford-Pittsburgh matchup?
Well, I think that'll be interesting. I think, though, Pitt's got to worry about getting to that point.
Oh, I meant Stanford getting the 1 instead of Pittsburgh, Mick.
Oh, yeah. I think Stanford's numbers indicate that they probably are on the upswing, and Pittsburgh's one of the 3 teams that I sense is struggling at the end of the season to score the way they want to score. I had Pittsburgh, BYU, and Ohio State actually struggling here at the end going into the tournament. So I think that's fair. I think Stanford's on the upswing. Their numbers, their production is amazing right now.
Well, the West Coast Conference got all 4 teams expected, with LMU, Pepperdine, and BYU adding to the USD mix. The ACC added 5 teams, with Miami and Florida State jumping in with Georgia Tech, Pitt, and Louisville. Then you have the Big East with their 2 expected, the American with their 2 expected, Conference USA as well. Then the 2 shakeups. The Mountain West Conference stole a bid. And if you're a Texas State fan at home and you're bitter that your team got left out with an RPI of 43, well, you can just blame Utah State for sweeping UNLV, adding a 2nd team to the Mountain West Conference. Utah State had a great run. They upset number 2 San Jose State in 4 sets in a great championship match. And then the MAC, one of the 2 teams that I got wrong in my bracketology, Ball State. I thought they were headed to the NIVC. They accepted their bid according to a source. Source was wrong for me. They're headed to the NCAA tournament. So the MAC gets 2 teams, as Bowling Green and Ball State played a dandy in 5 sets over in the MAC championship match. And then we have the worst team in, according to RPI, Mick, and that was Tennessee, who at the time of the bracket release, live RPI was 56, which is 2 points worse than Ole Miss got in last season. And we'll talk all about that in a minute. But now it's time to just break down some quarters. They call them quarters. We've got the bracket in 4 quarters. Let's go ahead and take a look at our championship potential Texas Longhorn section of this bracket. And as it sits right off the eye, 5 versus 4 in every quarter, Mick, is going to be a fun grabber. So Georgia Tech going to Wisconsin to potentially match up with Marquette. First Ball State Marquette. What do you think about this 4-5 here? Georgia Tech, a very dangerous 5 seed.
I looked at the numbers. I think Georgia Tech is going to have some trouble. They're relying. The one thing they have is they have Bergman. Bergman can score. Marquette's got some good players, good scorers, but Georgia Tech kind of gives me the edge. Then I look at the numbers. Marquette's production is way better than Georgia Tech. So then I changed my mind a little bit and I started thinking, yeah, maybe Marquette is my pick here.
The 4 line is certainly controversial. And I will be the first to say that I am surprised that Marquette and Creighton and Baylor are all 4 seeds and Rice gets left out, but we'll save the Baylor-Rice conversation for a little bit. Marquette fell in 5 against Creighton in the Big East Championship match. They're going to match up with Georgia Tech. Georgia Tech was so close to beating Pittsburgh in 5 the other day. They fell in that 5-setter. They probably got bumped off of that line. Looking at the other section, the bottom half of this, because obviously you see Texas, Georgia Towson could be fun. Towson, a team probably elated to not be playing in their Northeast region. Of course, they're usually matched up with Penn State. They did beat them earlier in this season. What do you think about Minnesota getting this early 2 seed? They're matched up with the potential UNI, Florida State, and then Ohio State, USC, which is a titillating 3-6 duel.
Well, I think Minnesota's okay. I think they get through the first 2 matches okay. They can't do like they have in the past, get caught not ready to play. That's been the crazy thing about Minnesota over the last 4 years. They have had some great wins, but they have gotten upset at least twice in this tournament, places in the tournament where you didn't expect them to lose. So I think Minnesota's okay, but until they get to what I'm going to pick is USC instead of Ohio State, who is hot right now.
Let's talk a little bit about the Buckeyes. Ohio State limping into the NCAA tournament. They lost those 2 very tough ones. On our previous episode, we talked about it, right, with Maryland and Indiana. And now Minnesota comes from behind on Friday to beat Ohio State in 4. That came just before Wisconsin wins the Big Ten once again in a 4-set dominant victory in Devaney. And then Minnesota and Wisconsin was a fun one, and then Minnesota then came back on Saturday and beat Nebraska on the road. Minnesota's looking good. Wisconsin, Ohio State was a fun one, but the Bucky Badgers won their 18th straight. Ohio State, they played Tennessee State in this first game, and I have to ask you, of all of the teams that Ohio State could have played, they avoid one of those at-large teams, and they play an AQ. It could be a get-right game for them, while USC has a little bit tougher of an opponent in High Point, as you would expect. Where would you sit amongst all of these unseeded, right? The top 8 seeds in each region get a little bit of credit and a little bit of a better matchup. Of all of the ones to wrap up our Texas talk here, you've got Southeastern Louisiana, UNI, High Point, Tennessee State, Ball State, Wright State, and Georgia to go with Fairleigh Dickinson. Who would you rank as the top 2 or 3, maybe upset picks?
Well, I think Townsend's going to beat Georgia. I looked at the numbers. Townsend has produced at a high level all season and has a very good differential, points scored to points given up. I think Georgia's going to have to take these guys really seriously, or Townsend's going to move forward.
I'm going to go on a limb and say that Northern Iowa is a team to watch here. Florida State, very talented, loaded, almost came away with a finish to the year that they would have loved, right? Beating Georgia Tech, but the Yellow Jackets were dominant in that final 3-set win. UNI is a team that beat Iowa State early in the season. Wouldn't be surprised to see them matching up with Minnesota. That's a long trek for the Seminoles to have to go all the way north. We'll obviously have a lot more talking points and moving forward, we'll make a little bit more predictions at the very end for Final Four and maybe Elite 8 matchups, but let's keep it moving here and go down to the bottom left where potentially the Texas-Minnesota region will be facing either Stanford or San Diego. We head out to Palo Alto. San Diego doesn't have to go too far for the regionals, so they get the benefit of that doubt. Couple surprising picks here. Of all of the geography shakeup, the committee did not want to separate Western Kentucky and Kentucky. The two of them have been married since what, the 2017 season? Is that when Kentucky beat them in 5 in the second set? And of course, they had that rematch in the Omaha spring season. That's the one that jumps out to me. What jumps out to you here in this region?
Well, first of all, I see UNL getting upset in their tournament, but I see them possibly beating Washington State in the first round.
Okay, well, let's hold on. Let's start with let's keep it Stanford and San Diego for the moment. Bottom
okay,
left
all right,
here,
all right. Yeah.
And maybe, I think Pepperdine Stanford is a very appetizer to a potential Hawaii Stanford matchup. That's got a lot of old school ties to it. South Dakota and Houston as well.
I had to look at this a second because Pepperdine was a team I thought was on the bubble that might not get in the tournament. When I looked at their production, I realized they should be in the tournament. But honestly, there are a couple of teams in this bracket, Auburn, for instance, and LSU, for instance, whose performance, and I don't have an opinion on this, I'm just using the numbers. Their numbers don't dictate that they should be in this tournament. And so I think Pepperdine getting put against Stanford right away, I think they may have, committee could have possibly moved them into another slot and given them a little bit better chance to get some momentum going into the second or third rounds.
I think this is the bracket filled with disappointing Novembers. That's exactly what it is. Pepperdine without Rachel Aarons, they had a disappointing November. You talk about Auburn. They lost every single set against the top 25 team this season. They went 0-5 against Kentucky twice, Florida, and then they finished the year losing all 6 sets to Arkansas. They lost last Wednesday to South Carolina in 5 sets. Their best wins are Georgia, who are the 39th RPI, both of those wins. Auburn, a team that is sitting right on the edge. LSU, a team that comes into the final weekend of the season just needing to win 1 against Georgia, and they're probably locked in, and they lose all 6 sets they play against the Bulldogs, and yet they back their way in because of this RPI nonsense that the SEC is the best conference, where if you watched Kentucky play Florida last weekend, you'd agree that it's still a toss-up between who's the best between those two. They each swept each other. That doesn't necessarily say that it's the highest quality conference if you can't even win a set against each other. We'll talk about that later. But when you see it, Mick, hold on, one more.
Yeah.
Then you throw in the situation that in the hardest at-large team gets in with UNLV, and they are a surprising team against Washington State. Now you go ahead.
Well, UNLV's production, though, is really good. They have a 13.
They're the best at-large, yeah.
13.8 kills per set. But you look at the two you were talking about in LSU and Auburn, and they're only producing 12.5 kills per set. I mean, you can't win much if you're not up in the 13s and 14s kills per set. Where else can you get those points? You can only get them from service aces or blocks, and usually that's only 3. So their production is so low. That's why you said Auburn had lost so many 3-0 matches. Absolutely, they can't score enough. And when people can't score, it's not good for the tournament. You need teams that can score to give the tournament and to give those teams a chance to see what they can do. So I think that's one of the things that I look at that I'm pretty sure the committee's not looking at is the production over the year. I'll tell you what, it's hard to hit the ball on the floor, no matter who you're playing. All right. So if you can hit it on the floor more times than everybody else, then I think you have to pay attention. And when we get to the other quadrants or quarters, if you want to call them that, I'll show you some matchups that are unbelievable with production that the committee could have spread out. So we're going to have some great first and second round matches in this tournament. And
even in this quarter, we'll move away from the negativity and go towards an optimistic side. There are some of the best first round matchups in the whole tournament right here in the bottom left, because South Dakota against Houston, both sitting with 3 losses is going to be brilliant. That Houston UCF final, Melville flexed in the 5th set. It was so fun as the Knights split the AAC with the Cougs, but Houston won more sets against UCF or lost less. And so they got the automatic qualifier. Elizabeth Junkie with South Dakota is a phenom. How about a matchup in Western Kentucky and Bowling Green? Those two know each other well. Of course, Western Kentucky is in the town of Bowling Green, Kentucky, and Bowling Green State is up in Ohio. Not to be mistaken for those fans. They're not in the same town. They're not a cross-town matchup, but still should be fun. For the right to play against Kentucky in Lexington, there's going to be a lot of Red fans there. Cannot wait for that one. And even San Diego, Northern Colorado could be one of those late night matchups, 10:30 Eastern time, out on the West Coast. You never know what kookiness can go on there. Speaking of the Cougs, how good is Washington State? How good is the Pac-12? We're going to find out right off the bat as they take on UNLV. And one more thing, there's no daytime matches in the entire first weekend. So the starting match of this Thursday and Friday are going to be at 4 o'clock Eastern time. So that's something to throw in for you fans trying to plan your watch parties. No nooners, no 9 a.m. West Coast starts. Instead, we'll have to deal with just the World Cup and then watch the NCAA Volleyball Tournament. It's going to be a great weekend, Mick. Let's move on over to the defending champs. Top right corner, Wisconsin gets the 1 seed once again. Nobody expected they wouldn't. But there are some big names in this quadrant. Of course, Pittsburgh, the 2 seed. They might match up with either BYU or James Madison. That off the bat, Mick, we won't go further. You saw JMU play. BYU has struggled. Is that an upset alert for number 7 BYU?
Yeah, I think that's a good match to watch, and that's another one of these matches. JMU produces points. They have 2 left sides that produce, and a warrior in the middle, in Davis, the middle blocker for JMU. And the Sun Belt really was not given a fair, in my opinion, a fair look here. They have 4 to 5 teams in that conference that are really, really good, that have great athletes. Texas State is in that, South Alabama's in that, Troy is up now, and they all have athletes. So JMU is representing all of the Sun Belt's efforts this year, and they had a great. Oh, I forgot Coastal Carolina also. They're another. They have 6 really good teams that are performing at a high level. So I think JMU's got something to prove. This is their first year in the Sun Belt, and they've won it going into the tournament. BYU better be careful.
And then another dangerous situation. Honestly, the 4-5 and the 6-3 situations are all a toss-up because FGCU against Iowa State is going to be a great matchup in Gainesville. Clearly, FGCU will have the hometown support, but I have to believe that Florida fans might be pulling for Iowa State there to avoid any sort of local matchup. But Maya Duckworth, the 5'10" outside for Iowa State, I saw her play. I think she's at right side now, playing in a 6-2 offense for Christy Johnson's squad. And that is a dangerous, dangerous team. The Gators nearly blew the SEC. Had to go to 5 sets on Saturday against Ole Miss just to tie Kentucky as Ajani Teeler flexed against South Carolina. She had 13 blocks. I think she's coming back for a 5th season. So the Gators are going to be on my upset alert here early. I know I'm a Gator, but I'm worried about them. At the same time, if you're a Penn State fan, you don't want to see McKenna Melville in the 2nd round. UCF will play Yale as Penn State hosts UMBC.
Now, that's a match that nobody understands, I believe, because you haven't seen Yale's production. Yale is producing 18 points per set, and that is national championship numbers right there. And so is Central Florida. And I thought a number 5 position for Central Florida was really underappreciated. I thought they should be a 3, probably, maybe a 4 at worst. They can score the ball.
Yep. I think Rice and UCF are my 2 shocks that they didn't make the top 16, and Marquette and Baylor are the 2 that made it in that I necessarily wouldn't have agreed with. How about McKenna Melville? She's now 9th in NCAA history in kills. She has over 2,525. She had 30 of them in the win over Houston in that de facto AAC championship match. But Houston wins their first conference title since 1999. Wanted to throw that in for the Cougs. Lastly, Washington. Swept by Washington State over the week. They have nicely put it, struggled here down the stretch, yet they still get a top 8 seed in the region and will face a TCU team that has played very, very good volleyball in the
But they
second half
can't
of the
score.
season. But they
TCU
can't
can't
score. Okay,
score.
here, explain me that matchup. Walk me through TCU Washington, because I don't think either of them are going to be able to score.
Washington's been bad. Washington's had trouble stopping people. They have ever since they lost their right side, their production has gone down. They're having trouble scoring too. They're having trouble playing defense, but they have too much firepower for TCU. TCU got in just under the bubble as far as I'm concerned, and unless they can figure out how to score points, Washington will win, possibly 3-0, 3-1.
Washington on senior night, though, in an emotional game for that crew of Hoffman and Grote and LMA Powell. They beat USC over the weekend. That was the 23rd. But for USC, you picked for them to get the big upset. Tuaniga's health is going to very much factor into that. So we'll have to keep an eye. She did not play in the finale, and her backup beat UCLA in that match as well. So that's the top right. Now we wrap things up, Mick, with the bottom right. Now you can talk about your Nebraska love, because the Huskers can't seem to get out of their own way. They struggle. They lose both matches in their final weekend. Unfortunately, they are without Kenzie Knuckles, who tore her ACL last week in practice. Very devastating. Allie Batenhurst was emotional in the post-game presser, and it was tough to watch, because K2, as they call her, is awesome, and she's so fun, and she's so easily likable, and it's disappointing that they won't be in it. But now for the Nebraska haters, it's going to be easier for them to root against.
Well, Nebraska's having trouble scoring also, but what they are doing is they're holding their opponents to some of the lowest numbers ever. They're holding their opponents to 13.7 points per set, which is amazing. It's one of the top 2 or 3 defensive positions in all of the teams playing. What they need to do is get their setting situation straightened out and either get people healthy or figure out who's going to play where, so that they can get comfortable and score the ball. If they can do that, they can get back in this tournament. But right now, they look like they're struggling offensively. They play some really nice defense. They hold the opponent's numbers down, but they can't turn it into points for themselves.
Well, sticking with Lincoln, the Miami Hurricanes and the Kansas Jayhawks is one of those first-round matchups between two teams that are kind of on the bubble, but both expected to make it, and two exciting teams. That should be fun. That's one of the first matchups of the weekend. Thursday, there's not too many, just 6 matches on Thursday. You've got that Bowling Green Western situation, Rice, Colorado, and let's talk about it now, because Rice and Baylor are potentially on a train track to match up in this 4 versus 5 matchup in Waco, and there's got to be a chip on the shoulder of the Owls, especially after they come from behind in an awesome Conference USA final to beat Western early in the week.
Yeah, this will be very challenging for Rice, but they're tested in the tournament. They have fought to get into this tournament 4 or 5 years now. They've been in. They played hard in each of the rounds. They've done really well that way. It'll be interesting to see what happens. If they can get through the first and into the second match, then I think they have a chance to get as far as regionals for the first time.
Yep, and that would be against Louisville. As we talk about the bottom right now, Louisville gets to host. They're the 1 seed. They will play against the winner of 2 familiar foes, as Purdue and Tennessee rematch from a match earlier in the season when Purdue on August 27th in Knoxville beat Tennessee in 4. Are you surprised to see the Vols? They are 0-7 against top 25 teams. Their only win against the top 50 team is Georgia, but they're rewarded for scheduling Pitt, Ohio State, Western Kentucky, Purdue, and Bowling Green. They also played against Colgate and lost. Colgate's a team that made the tournament as well. What do you think about the Vols?
I just don't think you should be patted on the back for losing. You have to beat somebody. There are several teams that have played well. Kentucky's one. Let's put Kentucky, and I'll talk about Kentucky. But Kentucky had a 1-6 against ranked teams at one point during the season, but they did have the 1. Now, if you turn around and look at their production, though, they're now producing at a level that's very close to when they won the national championship. And you have to give Skinner and his coaching staff really kudos for being able to take a number of role players and put them into scoring players and keeping that group together. And of course, the setter is the best in the country, in my opinion. DeGrom is way ahead of everybody else. She's really, really good. So that makes a difference to me. But I don't see how you can just schedule people and lose and get credit for that.
And the other matchup that we didn't talk about that maybe is going to be the best one because it's maybe the least attractive one, that's Arkansas, Utah State, LMU, and Oregon up in Eugene. None of them were surprises. LMU, maybe teams didn't expect to make it, but I think that the WCC spoke for themselves, and Loyola Marymount did enough. But back to Purdue, Tennessee here. What I had the biggest gripe with the committee this weekend is there were multiple teams that made the tournament that all they needed to do was win a couple matches at the end, and they didn't. Tennessee played 2 against Alabama to finish the season. They just had to win both. 152 RPI Alabama, and they lose 1. Auburn just has to win a few in the last week. They go 0-3. Right? You know, it's like you're not rewarding these teams that are limping down the finish line. And instead, you could have given a bid to UTRGV, right? You could have had them stay in Texas. You could have had Texas State stay in Texas as well. But regardless, we're not going to complain. We're going to look at the big picture now, Mick, and we're going to give our final 4 looks. Give me a little bit of Elite 8 talk here. We've got a few minutes at the end of the episode. I am not convinced that Texas is going to beat Minnesota again. I'm just going to start with that. I'm going to go Texas and Minnesota in the top left. I think that stays chalk. I think
if it gets to that point, you could be right, but I'm looking at Minnesota, looking past USC, who I'm picking to beat Ohio State, and that's an unfamiliar team. So I look for that derailroading situation maybe in that bracket, but it'll be interesting to see.
What about Georgia Tech, Texas, though? That's a lot. Sweet 16 could be a great matchup.
I don't think they have enough power. Texas scores the ball. Texas just has too much for Georgia Tech, and Georgia Tech is good. Like I said, Bergman carries them, but 6 rotations, they have some breakdowns in 2 or 3 of their rotations that make them extremely vulnerable. And if they can sneak through those rotations, those other 3 or 4 rotations score for them. And so I just don't see Texas losing to Georgia Tech.
How fun would the all Mick Haley regional final be if it's USC Texas? So we'll keep that in mind. But I think both of us are.
Well, I'll get to watch it. I like that. I'll get to go
in Austin. Yeah. You may have to get me a ticket down to Austin. That'll be on my birthday, actually. So we'll keep an eye on that. So I think we both have Texas in the top left, though. I will say they're going to be my official pick. Bottom left, I'm riding Stanford to the championship, so I'm going to lock them in. On the top half of the bracket, I'm going to go Stanford and Kentucky. That's what I think is going to happen. I think Emma Grome, friend of the show, carries Kentucky. I've got Stanford. Quickly, Mick, give me one or two here in the bottom left.
I think USD's steaming. I think they've got something to prove to the whole world. Okay. They've gone out. They played everybody. They did everything they could possibly do this year. They still don't get the respect that they feel they need. I think if they get up to Palo Alto, and they can get into that match with Stanford, watch out.
Top right. Is it Wisconsin? Are we sticking chalk? I can't do it. I can't keep the 1 seeds rolling. I already picked 2 1 seeds. I'm shaking it up. I am going to go with Pittsburgh. I think Pittsburgh gets out of the top right. I think Pittsburgh over Wisconsin in the regional final. What about you?
Well, I've watched Wisconsin in 2 or 3 finals now, in Final Fours. And sometimes if they're not playing a Big Ten team, they don't play well.
Remember that Florida, right? They escaped Florida in 5 sets in the spring season. They seem to be so comfortable
against the Big Ten teams, but boy, when they have to play somebody that's a little unfamiliar, that they're a little bit unfamiliar with. So I think you could give, if Pittsburgh can get there. I mean, Pittsburgh has to be careful. They have a couple of pretty good matches that they have to win, but
all right. So who do you think?
Can get in, they could do it.
Pitt? Okay, I want to go Florida, but freshman setter, tough to ask. I love Alexis, but we'll see. Bottom right, is it Louisville? Is it Nebraska? What do you think? Maybe Rice?
No,
Final four pick. I'm going Louisville.
I think Louisville has something to prove also. The only thing that you have to worry about is the transfer setter hasn't been on this stage before, and so you
Letharo. I don't know. I think she's a stud. I want to hear your final little memorandum. It's not, we could change it next week, but for now, as we sit on November 28th, what's your championship and what's it going to look like in Omaha? We've got exciting news about Omaha as well, so we give that to you in a second, but what's your pick for the Saturday championship on the 17th?
Well, right now, I think Texas is playing against themselves. But the one team that should scare them is Stanford because they're huge. And so Texas will have to ball control much better than they have. And they will have to deal with some size that they haven't seen that way. If it's not Stanford that gets in their way in the semifinals, then you have to be concerned about Louisville's speed. Now, Texas will feel more comfortable against Louisville, but they'll get a fighter, and it'll really be that kind of a matchup. If Texas has to play against Wisconsin, then it'll be interesting to see if this Wisconsin team can play against a team that is pretty confident also in Texas. So I'd say the Wisconsin-Texas matchup would be in Texas's favor. The semifinal matchup, if it's Stanford, might be in Stanford's favor because Texas is going to feel some heat. And we haven't talked about USD. If USD gets in there, I don't think that they can beat Texas just simply because of the way they match up. On the other hand, they got a firecracker for a setter, and she may just drive them on to victory. So, Texas has got the edge as far as I'm concerned, but boy, they better be careful.
Well, if USD makes, that means they beat Stanford potentially.
Yeah.
And that means they're pretty unstoppable. All right, Mick, enough politicking. Give me two teams. You don't have to give me a champion, but give me two teams. My championship is going to be Stanford and Louisville.
Yeah, I have Texas and Louisville.
Okay, there you have it. Now, for those fans curious, the AVCA poll is out, and there are a couple changes. Wisconsin jumped over San Diego, so it's Texas, Wisconsin, San Diego, Louisville as the top four. Stanford is 5, and at the bottom at the 16th spot, Baylor is 17 with Georgia Tech 13. So that would be the only change if the coaches had a say on who would host. Lastly, exciting news, and for those fans headed to Omaha, and especially volleyball heads, whether you're coaches or media, if you're going to the AVCA convention in December, on Thursday, before the Final Four, Mick and I will be doing a live show of 6 rotations at 10:45 a.m. local time, Thursday from the AVCA convention. We're going to work on streaming it as well, so we're either going to post that live or just post it a couple minutes after we finish up, depending on the bandwidth and all of that. But we'll be tweeting about it. It is Thursday, the day of the semifinals, December 15th. Mick and I will be doing a live show from the convention. So if you're headed to the convention, make a note in your time, 10:45 to 11:45-ish. Mick and I will be doing our Final Four preview, and then both Mick and I will be hosting the NCAA fan experience, and details for that will be posted. We will be in separate locations. Very excited. We're doing that Thursday and Saturday. So very fun week planned ahead. Mick and I have never met, so we're excited to do that as well. It's going to be a great volleyball community in Omaha in December. The question is, who will be there as we get set for the first games of the tournament on Thursday? And it starts with Bowling Green, Western Kentucky at 4:30 Eastern time, Wright State, Georgia Tech as well, Colorado Rice at 2:30 Pacific time, 5:30 Eastern time. That'll be in, of course, Central time, though, in Texas. Kansas, Miami as well, Georgia, Towson, UNLV, Washington State. We've got 12 matches on Thursday, and then all 6 of those second-round matches will be on Friday. And then, of course, the bevy of the rest of the teams will be Friday and Saturday timed up, nothing Sunday. So make sure to pencil in. It's going to be called Fifth Set, Mick. We talked about this. One more bit of news. the ESPN Plus streaming service will have a whip around coverage similarly to the college baseball tournament. And I remember clamoring for it, and it will be on ESPN Plus called Fifth Set. No details on who is hosting that yet for ESPN. But if it's anything like what Katie, Holly, and Courtney put together on Sunday night, that was beautifully done. Way, way, way better than previous selection shows from a production standpoint, from an execution standpoint, and just the fact that you can just tell Courtney Lyle loves the sport, loves covering these sports, and everything was done very well. We got to see Mick a chat with the committee chair, the Idaho State AD, Pauline Theros, who broke down everything. So if you missed that, you can go back on Watch ESPN and rewatch the selection show. But all is said and done from our perspective. All we can do is watch Thursday, Friday, and Saturday, talk about it on Monday. Cannot wait to chat with you guys again next week. Hit us with all of your opinions, your thoughts, your predictions, and more. Tweet at us at 6 Rotations or comment right here on YouTube. We're going to wrap things up. For Mick, I'm Daniel, and this is 6 Rotations.